So I declare the meeting open to the public.
Remember what it said today.
There's poor the healthcare department, but that's not rare.
Okay, I just want to remind anyone in the public gallery they can use their mobile devices through the Wi-Fi connection. All devices should be muted. Password details are available from the gallery rules for anyone wanting to connect to the Assembly's Wi-Fi network. I would remind the public that 3G or 4G should not be used and no recordings or photographs are to be taken. I would also remind members to, as usual, switch their electronic devices to mute mode to ensure the quality of sound recording. If every member is content, then we will proceed through the agenda as follows. Apologies. We've received no formal apologies, but I note that Ross Hussey is absent. I'm not sure if you've heard anything. No. Okay.
I just have to issue an apology. I have to leave early.
I'd remind members once again that you are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests at each committee meeting as applicable. Members have a copy of the minutes, which is contained in pages 297 to 301 of your main pack. I'm assuming everybody has read those, and are there any issues? Are we content? Okay, if we're content, those are agreed, and they will be published on the website. Okay, under matters arising, there is a list of previous expert witnesses given to give evidence on the budget. We discussed this last week around trying to ensure that in September we are, as was given out the traps quickly, and in our first evidence session that we do have evidence to be called, witnesses to be called, given how tight the time scale is. As all members had an opportunity to take a look at that. Do you want to speak to that?
Sure. These are witnesses that were called by the previous committee. Now, in relation to expert witnesses, there would be time for Raise to provide evidence to the committee, either in written form or oral evidence, and it might be preferable to take oral evidence because of the complexities involved. In addition to that, there are a number of other economists and people of interest the committee may want to call. Now, I'd need to get the committee to have agreement today on who to call because the timescale is very tight, and obviously with availability in that, it's something that would need to be scheduled fairly quickly.
So the list is on page 304.
The list, as far as I can see, is all male. Doesn't seem to be any women economists. We had a similar issue in the ERC committee, and we managed to ensure that we had a better gender balance. So I think we should relook at it in relation to that.
I think there is Joanne Stewart had appeared, hadn't she? I think.
Yeah, but she's probably appeared as IOD.
Yes, I think she is.
So the individual economists that we're inviting are all men. And I think that there's plenty of women doing very good work in economics, and I think we should expand the list.
Well, would it be an option for, in order to facilitate the clerk arranging the first meeting, that perhaps we look at some of the names there, but we ask for a fuller list to be circulated around members over the course of the next week, which has a better balance within that, and if members then can feed back their views about who then should come along, perhaps even on that first session, if we can get that agreed within the week, but then certainly schedule on that for the week 2, 3, 4, beyond that.
Yeah, it might be worth contacting Yvonne Galligan, who runs the Centre for get the name right, advancement of women in right across all the departments. For example, in Queen's, I'm sure there's something similar.
Sure, it may be preferable to return to this under item number 8. There's a potential overarching witnesses and in the paper from Raise. So maybe if members want to wait and make the decision on who to call under that, I think there's a broader range of options there.
Okay.
So I presume we're going to call people on merit, not on the basis of gender.
Absolutely.
Of course, yeah. But there's plenty of women with merit as well, Jim.
Maybe let's see them.
And degrees and experience and...
I think we're assuming here that the 14 best economists that we can call are not all male, but I think this is a list of alpha.
And there's people like Ansel McGowan and
Yeah.
others that would very much contribute and have contributed to our economic intelligence and thinking and scrutiny, and we can put those names through them.
And I do think, if we have a full list as possible, of course it should be in merit. I think this is very much about who will be useful to us in terms of our deliberations and who do we need to hear from. And also I think the range of views, I think it would be good to get a range of views and maybe see some of the contrasting opinions about this, just to get a full range of the discussion. Okay. Meeting with Department of Finance officials. If you recall from last week, we'd asked the clerk, at the suggestion of the Department of Finance, to meet with DOF officials to discuss the Memorandum of Understanding and get perhaps a bit more of an insight as to how we are likely to or not likely to progress this issue.
Yes, Chair. The meeting took place on Monday, and the department are going to research how the budget process works at various stages in other jurisdictions, including Westminster, devolved administrations, and in the ROI. And it'll be done in the context of the Belfast Agreement and the Northern Ireland Act. And research was also at that meeting, and they're going to undertake a similar exercise. There'll be ongoing discussion between the department and the Assembly officials during this process, and this will include a consideration of protocols for information sharing. The department is going to consider if and how additional time can be found within the current budget process, although they recognise that this is going to be very difficult. And officials will meet again with department officials week commencing the 8th of August to review progress and see what further steps can be taken.
Okay, there may be an opportunity just to talk a little bit more about this when we get to item 8 on the agenda, but any quick comments now? Okay, also contain...
Chair,
sorry.
The only thing would be, obviously, since the last time we discussed this and since our last meeting, we had a minor issue tail end of last week called the EU referendum, which has changed the whole dynamic completely. Whether you thought it was a good idea or a bad idea is neither here nor there. I think everybody is in agreement that it totally transforms the economic environment, and I think that has to be reflected on a number of ways going forward. Obviously, one in who we seek to talk to, because surely you'll need to understand what the impact is going to be from an EU perspective and also from a Westminster perspective, because there are literally hundreds of millions of pounds that could go AWOL from our budget going forward. Secondly, in terms of the budget process, the implications of how we interrogate that whole process, because whilst the budget we just went through last week was likely to be impacted by Brexit, certainly the 3/4 year budget that's about to be discussed will undoubtedly be majorly impacted. So it's a fundamental part of this whole review process. So I think both in terms of the budget, but also as well, and again, when we come to consider the forward work programme as well, I would have thought that now has to come to the top of the list in terms of the impact and how we consider that as a committee going forward. So I do think whatever people's views are, no one can discount it as not being major and impactful, and I think we need to look at that there. I'll finish. There's another issue, but
I just, I think that's absolutely relevant. I was going to raise it under item 8, but I'll just talk briefly to it now. There's no doubt it's going to have a significant impact, I think, for a number of reasons. First of all, we were anticipating a multi-year budget being negotiated in the autumn. We still are. We haven't received any information that will not be the case. But it seems to me that, given that the British government will not necessarily know, in fact, I don't think that they will know at that point the outcome, or even have perhaps a good projection about the outcome of the negotiations. We don't know what the impact is going to be in terms of the withdrawal post, sort of once, and presumably they're going to trigger Article 50 early in the autumn. So you're looking at a 2-year period. Now that 2-year period, given that they were talking about a 3-year resource budget and a 4-year capital budget, that will have implications significantly within the middle of that. Not least because without paying into Europe, there will be further funds in terms of the United Kingdom budget. There's no reason to believe that the Barnett formula is connected in any way to those renegotiations. So depending on the prioritisation, I think it is likely to be significant prioritisation around public services. There will be a direct burn consequential for us in relation to that. So there will definitely be implications of that. Furthermore, presumably that period of time will look at issues such as the replacement for single farm payments, for farm support, for business support, in terms of infrastructure, roads, etc. So there'll be a significant amount of discussion where there will be clarity, but that clarity will come presumably in year 1 and year 2 of what was supposed to be the multi-year budget that we were going to look like in the autumn. So I think there's no doubt there's going to be an impact of that. I think secondly, I do think that the committee are well placed to take a look at the implications. I think there has been some panic. There's been, in my view, a bit of hysteria about some of this. There currently is market movement. I think that market movement will stabilise in due course, as it always does after significant global events such as this. But taking ourselves aside from that, I do think there is a piece of work around, what are the opportunities now in particular. We've got a number of evidence sessions coming up. We've got procurement. And I think that most of us as MLAs will have spoken to local companies, organisations frustrated because of European procurement regulations, and that will no longer be the case for very many aspects, including some of the public sector contracts. We've got SEUPB coming up today. There's going to be implications for that. But I think the biggest implication is around our support for business, where state aid and other rules applied and constrained us very, very heavily and pushed us very much in the direction of the likes of R&D, whereas outside the European Union that will not be the case. So I think for the first time we have the potential here to start and have that conversation around, as a committee, and I know that those conversations have been ongoing by Invest NI and others, around what are the fiscal tools now freed from European constraints that we can use to fulfil our joint objectives around rebalancing the economy, growing our economy, etc. So I think there's a lot of work around that, and it may be the case when we look at that list of experts that had previously been called before. Do we want to expand that out to take a look at maybe some of the activities that are happening in other jurisdictions outside the European Union where there's evidence-based policies that these fiscal tools or budgetary tools have worked to stimulate the economy? So I think absolutely, I think it should be on our agenda.
I think from what you said, there are two things that maybe come to the top of the pile. One is obviously the Secretary of State's comments today about corporation tax, in that she has now said that we will still have to pay the penalty that Azores would have brought to us, and that needs to be fully teased out as to what the implications are of that. And the second issue, and maybe this is something we could maybe get that might inform our discussions going forward, is the Finance Minister said today in an article in the Belfast Telegraph that he had received contingency briefings prior to the referendum, and it would be maybe useful if this committee saw a copy of that paper, and maybe to help inform our decisions going forward, because I presume there was contingencies and policies that are now officials are now in the process of implementing. So I think it would be useful for this committee maybe to get a copy of that.
I think we can certainly write and ask them for that. I would say, my sense about this would be, Philip, is that you can't have a contingency prior to this, which will now be implemented, in the sense of we need to prepare, and the United Kingdom, and presumably there's been much work done on this around what the negotiation looks like, what is the ask, what is plausible or likely in terms of the outcome of that, and what's the best way to plan and how that's going to be implemented here and across the United Kingdom. I do think that where we can play a useful role is by looking at a range of things that we want for Northern Ireland, and feeding into that negotiation process. The British government made it clear that Scotland and Northern Ireland and Wales will be part and partial of that negotiation. And I think, regardless of whether we will remain or leave, and I know there's a mixed views around the committee, the key thing here is to get the best deal for Northern Ireland in terms of the exit and the 2-year period. So Jim, I think Jim had a comment. Sorry, Johnny, just before you.
I think you may go for old Jim and young Jim.
See, if you both sit in the same direction, it's quite
You've gone long hair, Jim and
Neither of any hair.
that would applies. I just wish people just a very tiny issue. Impact's a noun, by the way, folks. It's not a verb. So I notice people in the European Government keep referring to impacting and all that. That's very poor English. But could I just say, on a much more sensible point of view, I suspect, there's some very exciting prospects about the decision. Everyone's sort of taking a very negative look at things, but there's many opportunities for Northern Ireland and for Northern Ireland's economy. But what I would just say is that I suspect that many other committees in this place will be having a similar conversation. Obviously, the Economy Committee, no doubt the Agriculture Committee as well, and maybe even Infrastructure. So we need to be slightly careful we don't tramp on the toes of other committees. And I don't know if the Assembly is going to adopt a more holistic view, regardless of where you stand, either in or out. And of course, I think my party's view is extremely well known. We all do accept this is a significant development. That's without any question. But I think we need to do it in a way that doesn't transgress in other committees that we look at.
No, and that's why I raised the fact that the Department of Finance has responsibility, for example, with sort of SUPB and now has the European brief transferred from the old OFM to FM. In addition, it has the responsibility for the likes of corporation tax, so although an issue which will impact most arguably on the economy and have the ripple out impact, it is the Department of Finance that deals with that. So I think there is a case to say that when we're looking at the overall budget and we're looking at sort of the economic impacts of the budget, it may be a useful piece of work just to look at economists that have some insight into the wider picture post EU, UK. And really, I suppose, get a better sense about what wider range of fiscal tools. There's no doubt we will now have a wider range of fiscal tools, and how that can be used in budgetary terms to the greatest effect. So I think absolutely we don't want to duplicate anything, but I just think there is an economist, there is a role which is directly connected to what the Department of Finance is responsible for too. Sorry, John.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I accept that this is obviously pertinent to the debate as we go forward, but I think it would be useful for the committee to try and take it in a measured way. It seems almost for me that sort of Project Fear has been overtaken by Project Hysteria, and we have to do everything yesterday. And yet, as each day goes along, one day you get the rating agencies, Moody's or whatever, downgrading the British banks, and then you see today, the second day in a row, their stocks rise.
Yeah, 2.5% today.
You then see Spain and Greece at -12 and -13%. The stocks least affected are the FTSE 100 at -4.
And the pound is
So,
rising as well.
All I'm saying is, can we take a measured debate as we go forward, cognizant of the fact that everybody, most people, I should say, are aware that this is a process over the next 2 years post the triggering of Article 50, and it'll be more of a marathon than a sprint.
I think there is an opportunity as well to say, look, nobody on either side can say for certainty about what the impacts are. There's uncertainties on all sides, but I do think it's about trying to project forward and say, well, how do we use this as an opportunity? We are where we are, but also I think not to be distracted, as Jonathan's outlined, by market movement at the moment, because I think that's inevitable, that you are going to get market movement after this type of event. So again, once we consider this in September, it may well be a much more stabilised position in any event, but I think it's worth us understanding better the way that the economy operates in terms of these types of things.
It's worth saying the markets look like they're just going to about pass the level they were at before the Brexit vote. Interesting that the market's not as fearful as the members opposite.
Okay.
Richard, could I just
It's all
clarify?
been concerted for September, yes?
Could we ask for the Finance Minister's paper, if whatever that briefing was, prior to the referendum, and if there was any update on that after from the department, their advice on the ramifications and what they were doing to mitigate that?
Absolutely, and I think there's also a suggestion. I think we should ask for our own briefing on this as well, to get a bit of an insight. Katrina?
No, I just wanted to say, I think we need to be very careful not to delude ourselves in relation to the impact. We can talk about Project Fear and Project Hysteria. I think looking for the impact of what happened and being ahead of the curve you know, as a finance, all the institutions are doing it. I'm trying to find an email here so that we can get some good economists from across the spectrum. The Queen's had one last week or this week, bringing economists from all over the place. I think we need to be understanding the impact of this and not pretending that people are being hysterical, because we're not. This is going to impact every single aspect of our lives.
And I suppose
Every
that's why,
single aspect.
That's why I'm sort of saying that, Deepo, rather than us continuing to, I suppose, engage in a discussion about why something has happened and whether it should have, is to actually to look forward and say, well, in relation to, and I saw the email about the Queen's event, you know, a wide range of speakers there, just to allow us all to be better informed in terms of charting a way forward. And we do have that space. You know, we'll have 2 years from Article 50, but my view would be if we are informing that process as soon as possible, and informing those negotiations as soon as possible is the way forward. Okay. So just to move on to the first evidence session, which is overview of the work of the Central Procurement Directorate. Unsurprisingly, we are moving. We are a little behind time, but. So, could I refer members to the following paper from the Department of Finance, briefing papers on the work of the Central Procurement Directorate, at pages 311 to 316 of the main pack. And I want to welcome Des Armstrong, who is the Chief Executive of the Central Procurement Directorate, and Gareth Johnson, who is the Director of Policy and Performance in the Central Procurement Directorate. And I'd like to invite the witnesses to make a brief opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. In previous mandates, we have gone straight to questions, so we've given you a briefing paper. I'm happy to do that if that's okay with members.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming along. I suppose we can start with a question we were just discussing about the impact of the vote in terms of the European Union. And I know that certainly as a representative, albeit for a relatively short time so far, but there had been issues raised on a number of occasions about frustrations around procurement and the way that we operate procurement under a range of obligations and rules, and one of the big issues often talked about, and I suppose this is what I'm asking, is around European procurement regulations and how that has constrained us in the past. So I suppose I want to ask you, you know, had you considered this issue? Are you considering this issue? What's the potential impact of that, particularly around support for local businesses? It's one of the big issues that had been raised to me on a number of occasions about local businesses saying, look, why is the Northern Ireland Executive or the UK Government, can they not do more to support Northern Ireland businesses and United Kingdom businesses as opposed to go out to wider procurement? Presumably this gives an opportunity to do that, but I want to ask you, have you considered that issue? What's the impact likely to be?
Yeah, I suppose the starting point, is that public procurement is heavily regulated by the European Union. It's seen as one of the key drivers to help establish a single market and feeds into other wider strategies that the European Union have in terms of 2020. So the issue, I suppose, has been that although the regulations and the directives are intended to increase the amount of free flow of business across the European Union, actually studies show that there's relatively small amounts of business actually happen across the borders of member states. So to a certain extent, that hasn't really supported the main aim of the regulations. We've just introduced a new set of regulations following a substantial review of the directives that were put in place in 2004 and the regulations came into place in 2006. The summary of that on a European-wide basis was that the regulations that came through from those directives were restrictive and were preventing flexibilities in terms of breaking contracts up into lots, changing the type of contract after you've awarded a contract. So that was really placing us in a position where we had to be very clear what we were going to the market with, because we had little scope under the regulations to change the contracts after that. And that was seen then as preventing an engagement with the market to allow us to improve the effectiveness of public procurement. So as part of the revision of the European directives, we lobbied through the Cabinet Office for greater flexibilities in the regulations so that we could address some of those issues. And you'll see in the new public contracts regulations, some of those flexibilities have been reflected. We can now break requirements of it to lots. We can limit the number of lots that can be awarded to a particular contract. Therefore, that allows for greater scope for smaller businesses to, to pick up a lot. We also have clearer guidance now on how we can modify contracts after they're in place. And also we have clear indications that it is okay to engage with the market before procurement processes are established or started. That alongside the sort of policy work and development that CPD was carrying out, we were listening to the feedback in terms of how the procurement process was being run in Northern Ireland, and we've gone through quite a bit of revision through policy guidance notes on trying to address those issues. We've worked very closely with the construction industry, for example, in quite detail to look at how the procurement process works for the construction industry. We still hear criticism around that. I think we have engaged pretty effectively, and we've broken down the procurement process into bands of value and not applied the a one-size-fits-all approach with construction. And we're trying to engage more effectively with market sectors and supplies and services. So this is a bit of a journey that we've been on, and we're listening to feedback and trying to bring forward solutions to problems that industry and business are telling us about. One example, for example, would be in construction, would be project bank accounts, where we've taken quite strong action to try and make sure that the good relationship that exists between government and the main contractor and the payment process flows through the supply chain. So, but in terms of where we are with in terms of the vote last week, I think immediately there'll be no change because the regulations will be in place until the UK leaves the EU. And the new arrangements that will be in place post that will depend on the trade agreements and the arrangements that are put in place after that. The current regulations that we have in place bring forward the government procurement agreement with the World Trade Organization. So currently we are required to treat suppliers from the United States and Canada, Japan, in the same way that we treat suppliers from Lisbon or Lisbon. So you can see that the trade agreements that will be in place after the UK leaves will have to be reflected back into the public procurement regulations that we have here. I suppose we do have some scope, I suppose, to address more of the policy issues that we want in terms of localism, because not only is public procurement covered by those regulations that we've set down, it has to take into account the wider legislation that's in place in Europe. And one example of that would be the Posted Workers Directive, which impacts on a desire to produce a living wage requirement in a contract. But we will be following very closely developments as we go forward. We've spoken to colleagues in Scotland and Wales and in the Cabinet Office, and we've agreed that as developments become clearer, that we will be in contact with them to see and make sure that Northern Ireland's position is reflected in any new regulations that may emerge out of this decision.
In terms of discussions, and I'm presuming that there have been a number of discussions official to official level in the run-up to a potential Brexit around, how that impacts on the way governments do business. Do you have a sense at this stage that procurement and I suppose the complications around procurement, particularly public procurement, caused by European Union incentives and other aspects, that is something that is going to feature very heavily in terms of the British government's negotiating position around trying to reduce that burden on businesses and governments? Has it been talked about in the sense of, this is something that's high up the agenda to address, as opposed to something that may find its way into a negotiated agreement on free trade?
Well, we are pretty fresh from the previous discussions on the regulations. CPD was involved in quite a detailed consultation on the new regulations that we produced last year. part of the issue, I suppose, is that European directives limit the amount of scope there is for member states to produce their own legislation. So when you get a European-wide directive, there's little scope around that. If we're in a position where we want to remove some of the burden or perceived burden of Europe, then I think the issue that we would be putting forward would be we need to look at the amount of cross-border trade that actually results from public procurement, and we also need to make sure that in Northern Ireland that the localisation issues that will arise are, in terms of what Scotland might want to do with their regulations, we need to make sure that that doesn't have an impact on Northern Ireland businesses who trade in Scotland and in England and Wales and also in the Republic of Ireland.
I suppose, were you picking up a sense of dissatisfaction with public procurement constraints across, in Whitehall and across the UK, or is that something that's just really more of an issue for us here?
Well, in terms of the frustration, I suppose seems to our mind is one, that the process was overcomplicated and that we put too much burden on suppliers to tender, and we've been trying to slim that right down to the minimum, and we've got some further work on the go around that. Inevitably, no matter how efficient the procurement process we put in place, there will always be one winner and 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever tenders who are not successful, and the colour of their opinion tends to be as whether they've got the contract or not. But we've been in detailed discussions with CBI on this, who came forward with a set of issues that their members were bringing forward. And when we put it down, and went through it in detail, a lot of them are not actually around the procurement process. A lot of them are around the commissioning process. So what does government want to buy? Why will government not change its requirements or engage with industry to find out what's the best service that can be provided? The issues around delays in business cases once tenders are submitted and getting the award. And we also feel there's an issue around the contract management phase. So the procurement bit in the middle has been a real focus. And we've been really, really focused on that. And we'll continue to do that. But I think we need Northern Ireland to widen that into looking at the commissioning phase, which is before the regulated procurement bit, and also how we deal with delivering contracts in Northern Ireland, making sure we get the value out of those.
So just lastly, before I invite questions from the rest of the committee, one of the issues of concern that has been raised, and I had been involved in a previous role very heavily with the Social Investment Fund, and there was a great deal of frustration that even when letters of offer went out, the procurement process, in terms of the design brief and everything else, it was complicated, it was lengthy, it's still ongoing for many people, and that's a source of frustration for people. But one of the big issues that came into play there was the difference between what seemed to be a private sector market price and a public sector procurement market price. And I know that some of the local community organisations or others would have went to somebody to get indicative costs initially for their proposal that they put in. Those costs went in, looked through, went through business case, etc. And then when they get to procurement, central procurement are saying, well, no, this is what, based on the evidence that you have, this is what the cost is. Now, I have people in front of me saying, on one hand, we've built a church hall, similar size, similar spec. We built it 2 years ago for 400,000. CPD are coming back and saying to me to do exactly the same thing, and we got our costings from that. It's going to cost 1.2 million, and that pushes it back into another business case process. So, it does strike me. Have you done any analysis about, well, is there a gap there in terms of what, if you invite people to cost for something, is it considerably higher than if it was a private sector or third sector organisation using their own funds?
Yeah, I think it depends really on quite a lot on the specification and on how quickly or what changes might be made to the specification once you move forward. Our advice, I suppose, would be based on the sort of tenders that we've been received and the sort of costs that are in those, and we've got quite a bit of cost data around that. The market might be different. You might have more players in the private sector and more able to negotiate the prices up and down. But on a specific issue that I couldn't comment, but I'm not sure we can make a direct comparison between what a particular unit would be like in the private sector and what it would be like in the public sector.
I suppose
Certainly that's something we could see if we could have a think about how we might address that concern.
The other aspect, of course, is that sometimes there are requirements that we need to put against things in the public sector in terms of, the sustainability or their environmental impact, or do they meet the right standards, that maybe a private sector firm would have a bit more flexibility around, and that can affect price. We do, though, continue to drive value for money within public procurement. There's a big programme at the moment of collaborative procurements across central government, 43 areas of common and repetitive spend where we now have collaborative contracts in place, and that was very much responding to points that were put by the Audit Office in a previous report. The savings are cumulative, so they keep growing, but so far we've identified savings of £10 million there. So even within the constraints of public procurement, there is lots that we can do to get better value.
Yeah, and I know that, and I'd questioned it previously around, compared to the previous bids that you get in for your contracts, you can have a sense about what is a fair or not fair price. I suppose the difference is, is the public sector paying the same price for the same thing as other people are? And I think a strong sense out there is that we're not, taking into account some of those additional aspects. It might be something that's interesting for us to look at moving forward, but I know Philip had indicated sort of first there.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, gentlemen. A couple of questions, just maybe to build on some of the points you've already made. As you mentioned in your opening remarks about, or I think it was response to the question from the Chair about how there's been no impact to date, obviously, on procurement from the outworkings of the EU referendum at this stage. Does that include major infrastructure or project contracts, particularly those that may have had a dollop of EU funding? Is that still going to go ahead as planned?
Well, when I was talking about the impact, that was around the impact of the changes in the regulations. Obviously, as we go through this, the issue around the mix of funding on projects will be important. Quite a lot of the capital projects that I believe that are in the programme are going to be funded by conventional capital. There will be interventions around, from Europe, and the debate's already started. I heard some of the questions at Parliament today around how assurances that were given around European money being replaced by money that didn't go to Europe, how that works. But that's not. I'm not expert on that. But in terms of taking forward projects, the procurement process is going to be untouched. I suppose there might be issues around exchange rates, where existing contracts have been let on a particular stabilised rate of exchange, and where that goes, and what happens if organisations are working across borders. So, but at the minute, it's early days, but we will continue to watch that.
Thank you. Second question, Chair, then is just you mentioned in your opening remarks around social clauses for contracts. One of the issues certainly that I've had a number of people coming to me about is subcontractors not getting payments cascaded, certainly in a timely fashion. Yeah. Money's being withheld. I know it's something that you have been keen to try and improve upon. What's your feel for how that's performing at the moment? And are you content that there are sanctions, or there's something in there to ensure that primary contractors are doing what they're meant to?
Yeah, well, I mean, in terms of subcontracting, it is something that we recognise as a feature of the construction industry in particular. But subcontracting has to be controlled and approved. So the starting point would be that subcontracting shouldn't proceed unless the client has given approval for it. We've put a requirement in that there should be back-to-back conditions of contract for subcontractors, so the same terms and conditions should be flowing down through the supply chain. And I think the work that we've done in project bank accounts, first of all starting as pilots, then starting to roll them out into larger contracts, has reassured the industry that they are of benefit. And in fact, we've had some very good feedback from contractors who have now said, well, actually one of the benefits of using this type of arrangement is that suppliers are given us better terms because their payment is more secure. So it's something I think that we will continue to get feedback directly from the construction industry, and we meet with the Construction Industry Forum, and that's one of the areas that we will be giving them feedback on. But we have committed to speak to the industry and give, look at the pilots that have happened, get feedback, and we have some of that at the moment.
We do check a sample of contracts every quarter to make sure that the payment arrangements are working down the chain, and that's only identified a handful of issues which can then be dealt with and have been dealt with by the project manager. The other area we're looking at is the whole area of retentions in construction contracts, making sure, well, first of all, that we apply best practice there, but also starting to ask the question whether retentions are always necessary. There are certainly classes of contracts where they're not necessary, and we would like within CPD to pilot on a broader basis than that, instead of having retentions that go all the way down the supply chain. Can we be relying on more robust contract management, maybe on some kind of central fund self-insurance, the way government also often handles these things, and hopefully not only ensure better flow of cash down the supply chain, but also maybe save ourselves some money in the process.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
And I think sometimes there is a difficult balance there, around the connection with business cases and procurement, because it does sometimes strike me as odd that if there is, and it emerges in the middle of say a large infrastructure project, the potential for significant savings. In fact, if the savings go beyond the 10% leeway that you have in relation to these things, would have to go back and get business case approval, etc. So almost disincentivizes, maybe subcontractors or the main contractor from taking those savings and coming back with a solution to government. So, Paul.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your paper. I agree with the concept totally, and I think it's a good way forward in relation to CPD and what they're attempting to achieve. But in relation to the regulations that are put forward, they're probably, and I'm just asking for some clarification, because my understanding is that some major contracts that we have awarded through this process have been subject to fairly extensive legal costs and compensations, where other contractors who felt that they didn't win a contract through this process have taken it. And appreciate your mentioning about savings that you're attributing at 10 million, but where you're aware of compensation which has had to be paid to some of these developers or contractors, fairly big sums, are they included, or is this 10 million saving a saving on paper on one area, and the legal aspect and compensation claims that have been paid out, which have been quite big, are they in another field?
Well, the savings that we identify are really looking at what we were procuring and what we're procuring through the collaborative procurement contracts. So we can look at that. One of the potential areas, I suppose, is demand management. If we actually bought less or used less, then you could save more. So the savings would be that way. So the 10 million is really a comparison between what we used to do, scattered across a number of contracts, and then one coming on to what we've done in the new contracts. But in terms of compensation events, I'm not sure whether it's referring to the arrangements that are in the NEC3 contract, or whether it's because of legal challenges that we're having to pay compensation out of that. I'm not just clear about it.
Well, probably could use one example where we had the A8, for argument's sake, which is a fairly recent one, where two contractors who were involved in the tender process and another contractor won the contract. The other two put in a legal challenge against that and happened to win the case on it. So the settlement has been made, which was way in excess of £10 million, I might say. But just in relation to that, I want to know, would that, because it would have been done through CPD, I would have understood that contract. It was a fairly large one.
I think that contract is not a CPD contract, so I think it's Transport NI would be on that. But in terms of the legal challenge, and that's one of the features of the directives and regulations, is the right for an economic operator to challenge the award decision, and for the courts then to intervene, and for the courts to place orders as to how they will deal with any issue of the regulations or the directives. So it's something that falls into the gift, if you like, of a supplier. And some suppliers or contractors will take advantage of that in a commercial sense, as they would with any other opportunity they have, and some suppliers will not. One of the things that we want to do with the construction industry now is to look at how we might get to the position where we can have less legal challenge, if you like, to really go through the process and to agree with the industry. That's how we're going to take forward procurements and reassure the industry that that's a fair process, and then try and reduce the amount of legal. But in terms of the legal process, when that starts, it's something that has a way of going. Let's go with it. Any settlements or matters for court, and we couldn't sort of comment as to whether high or low. It's a matter for courts to issue.
I want to ask, within the department and those that are involved in awarding contracts and looking at contracts and ensuring that whenever we're working together collaboratively to try and achieve best savings, what expertise is there in relation to ensuring that you're getting value for money and it's not just a paper transaction that a cartel of guys put together a bid, knowing rightly that, and the Chair alluded to it earlier in relation to a similar hall, same specification, and maybe I'll use a very clear one, where this is identified, where there was grant funding, and it's a community organisation, where we're getting grant funding to build a community facility. Specification was set, drawings were done, everything else. They decided to have, because the costs that were being imposed upon them, and whenever it came back from tender, it was so high, and just using an example of exactly what can happen. The amount came back so high that the community organisation put it out themselves to local suppliers and builders, and came back and were able to get it for a lot less, and decided not to take any grant funding whatsoever because it actually saved them money. They were having to put in their own contribution as well as the grant funding. They forgot about the grant funding and delivered it totally themselves and saved money. And simply that was down to bureaucracy, and nobody within the department who actually were looking at the issue about the funding were saying, well, this is value for money. They were looking at pieces of paper. And what expertise is there to ensure that we are getting value for money?
Well, our expertise, I suppose, would be built up in terms of looking at the tenders that come in, but also we have a branch that looks at grant funding. So we do see the rates that are being supplied into some of the private sector, or where the project is mostly private sector funded. So that's one of the things I suppose we could look at, is just to see if we can use the information that we have already on that. But you know, if we had those things reported to us at the time,
it was reported.
Yeah,
it was reported.
And I think it does touch on the very point that I'm saying, that it happened throughout, and you'll be aware it happened in Social Investment Fund, where it took costs from very similar spec, coming in about maybe 500,000, and it wasn't just one, it was a number of projects coming back maybe over the £1 million. And I don't think it's just about the grant funding, and agree with your point in terms of the percentage to be put towards that. The fact is that, you know, I think there is a question here about what price the market is generally, and what price people price government contracts at. And I don't think anybody disbelieves you that you're basing this on the types of contracts that you're getting in, and you've got that, you've got that empirical evidence around what you've had before. I think the difficulty is public sector versus private or community or churches or anything else. There's a massive gap in what you can get for
I think historically there had to be some movement on that to ensure that, you know, people thought, well, if I'm doing a government contract, I'm going to get paid, but it might take some time to get it, because we did have what I call the bean counters, who, whenever it came out, they wouldn't pay out in a contract because there was specification that there were 4 screwed hinges in the doors, and he put in 5, and he's only put 4 screws in because there's a screw missing. I'm only mentioning this because I know this happened in a contract that went into the health department, and a small contractor was laying out thousands simply because couldn't get the hinges they wanted, but he put in a higher back one. And whoever went round looked round, it says there's screw missing out of those, and wouldn't pay out on a fairly major amount of money. And I appreciate that I can understand, and I would say to him, put in enough to make sure you're going to cover it whenever you do get it. You know, and that has went on, because you've bean counters who are there who literally they've haven't the common sense of the back door, never mind do the job, and that's the point. But apologies.
John?
Yes, thank you. What's the budget of CPD? What's your actual running cost?
The budget last year would have been about £18 million. If you count in, we have.
So what does it cost to run not what you spend, what was the staffing cost and accommodation cost?
We'll be operating at
It
60.
depends, yes, about 16 to 18 million. It'll be about 16 million this year. Of that, there is about 4 million, slightly less this year, which is funded from the baseline from the department. The rest would come in terms of charges that CPD makes for its services.
And then over what period of time have you made your £10 million saving?
Over what period is it, sorry?
Over what period of time have you made the £10 million savings you referred to?
That would be since the collaborative procurement programme was put in place about 3 years.
A couple of years, yeah.
2-3 years.
So you've saved 2 years running costs? Really? Well, I'm not getting at the CPD but in particular. I think and I blame politicians for this, okay? We have too many layers of bureaucracy and accountability and audit and review on the spending of public funds. And we're in danger of reviewing rather than doing. And I know you have to be protective of public funds, you have to ensure you get value for money, etc., etc. But I think we have reached the point where we have that many mechanisms in place that we're actually spending more money reviewing than we are actually going out the door and putting up buildings and resources and all that sort of stuff. So, again, I'm not getting at yourselves, but I question the purpose of some of the bodies we have in place. Convince me.
That's an existential question.
Convince me that CPD is necessary.
Well, in terms of yes.
Well, I think you have to realise that government needs some process for managing public money expenditure. It needs some expertise because the requirements the government had are quite complex, and in CPD we've got a range of professional people who can help deliver that. But CPD is only one part of the process of delivering anything that's required by government. There's a need for commissioners, and there's a need for those that will then work with the suppliers that are put in place to deliver the service out to the public. So I think just to have a narrow focus on CPD, which is what has been largely the case in my view, I know that members might disagree with that, has masked some of the issues that arise in the other parts of the procurement life cycle. So if you take a procurement life cycle from the development of a need through the decision as to whether you can afford to go with that, developing the requirement, getting the business case in place, running the regulated procurement process, and then getting into a relationship with a contractor to deliver a service out to the public or whatever, or build something. There are lots of players in that, of which CPD is just a part. We are a central purchasing agency. We can set contracts up for others. If we weren't there, you would need to replicate that sort of expertise within other organisations, and some of the COPs do that. So it was the decision of the executive back in 2002 to centralise procurement, and that decision has been replicated in Wales and in the Republic of Ireland and in Whitehall. So there seems to be a view around that centralisation can produce efficiencies. And in terms of CPD, the headcount that we have now is way smaller than what we had when we started CPD back in 2002, 2004. So we've been on an efficiency drive as well. But yeah, I mean, if the argument is centralise or disperse, but the evidence seems to suggest greater centralisation is what others are doing.
And there are examples we can give within CPD. I mean, just over the last year with the voluntary exit scheme, where we've lost 50 staff. Now, there will be a very small number of specialist posts that would need to be replaced, but the vast majority of those staff we're not replacing because we've looked at our processes, we've made things leaner, we've adopted different ways of working, we've looked at economies of scale. We brought in some years ago justice sector procurement with 25 staff. We now have 11 in that area. We brought in the procurement of health projects, capital projects for health, with 62 staff. We now have 52. So I mean, we can give examples of how within CPD we continue to drive value for money and efficiency in the organisation.
I'm not picking on CPD. I pick on everybody with equality. The question, but I'm sure what you do, what you are tasked to do, you do very well. Okay? My point is this. It's what you do. Is it necessary? And how much to a degree is it necessary? Because I think we have to go back to the bare basics of the purpose of government and what we want to achieve. And I do blame politicians for it. I think we've put in that many accountability mechanisms and review mechanisms and catch-all mechanisms that we're diverting significant amounts of public monies away from delivering and putting it into reviewing. And I use my experience as chair of the Public Accounts Committee, where I think that we're in danger, if we have not already achieved there, that we've made our civil service risk adverse. We're very capable civil servants are risk adverse now, who could be doing much more if we let them loose a bit. But I also come from the point of view as minister. I find it frustrating trying to spend public money. Because see, trying to get public money out the door into projects and spent, business cases is almost a dirty word to me now. It really does.
4 years later.
It really does wind me up.
You did manage to spend a fair bit.
I did, yeah. But it.
Irish language.
No
one understood the business case.
I've lost the chain of thought. In terms of the business cases, is almost an industry in itself. So we, and I point to this side of the table, we've got the balance wrong, and we need to rebalance it in a way which allows, with confidence, that public monies is being spent, but it has to be spent.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of business case, just for the record, CPD is quite a small input into the business case process. That's the commissioning bit that I was trying to draw your attention to.
I think, to be fair, and I think it actually is just, I think there's a number, there's a number of people who have been in departments, around the table as well. And although you say that, I think if you've been through a process of from a stop-start position of a new project as a minister within a department, you are looking at 3 or 4 years by the time you get through policy, consultation, business case processes, and then that the connection with central procurement before you have, a brick in the ground. So, I think it's very frustrating for people. Often I had thought to myself, if we just simply said to people, right, you've got £400,000 for this community centre, here you go, that's what you've got, go and build what you can for that, and probably get a much better deal than us saying, originally it's £400,000, we want to do this, go through the process, it's 1.2 million, and they end up 3 years later with something probably very similar to what they would have got for the 400,000.
Just a wee point that in relation to, you mentioned about staff that migrated across under CPD from the Department of Health and other departments. Is there any realisation of the saving, ensuring that those departments do not try to build up, because they have their own property management end or whatever that might be, or whatever, that they don't attempt to draw up, because their budgets, say for argument's sake, just use a very round figure, their budget's £1 million this year, you've taken 50 members of staff across, their budget's still £1 million. Do you understand?
The budget transfers with the staff.
But does the budget transfer with it?
Yeah. Yes. We are funded. That's one of the, I suppose, the advantages of using CPD is that the service that we provided is costed.
To the department, to the department,
yeah.
That's okay.
You have to pay for the privilege.
No, I appreciate that. I just wanted clarification to make sure, because that's...
there is also a service level agreement with each department which makes clear what CPD is responsible for and what the department is responsible for.
And is there still reluctance among some to actually to engage and do it?
Well, is there reluctance? I think that one of the frustrations, I suppose, comes back to the time frame that's needed to get projects on the ground, and are those time frames understood, and are they realistic, and do they fall in with the funding arrangements that occur? Because in your funding and time frames that folk are given for spending some of the funding, particularly if it's coming in as an additional raft of funding, there are some things that are in the new regulations that will help us, so that we will not be starting the procurement process when someone comes with the funding. We would like to try and get the arrangements in place that we have part of the procurement process established and a shorter process then to award the contract. But lots of the approvals and the business case and deciding what projects you're going to bring forward are not CPD's area. Those are-
You maybe missed where I was coming from. I'm wondering if there are departments which are not keen, they want to hold on to their wee procurement section, they don't like to hand over responsibility to CPD.
Well, the departments will maybe have procurement staff, I suppose, to interact with CPD, but that will be very small in numbers. There are no areas that are holding staff for procurement, except in the Centres of Procurement Expertise and in some areas in health, where the social care issues still need to be addressed in terms of the procurement regulations. But the decision to centralise means that we have a service level agreement with all the departments, and the departments list their arm's length bodies that will use CPD, and we get a report back from departments on a regular basis saying where the procurement has happened. We also have a centralised e-tenders system now, that all the projects above 30,000 go through that, so we can rack up quite quickly the spend and reconcile that against expenditure.
And I think, to be fair, to clarify, I'm not saying that CPD, and I don't think anybody is saying that that's the reason for huge delays and things, but I do think there's a great misunderstanding out there, even with our elected representatives. I've sat in the chamber and listened to people talk about social investment fund, thinking it's some sort of political disagreement when there wasn't any. It was the fact that it takes 3 years, or 3.5, 4 years to get through the system. The difficulty is, as you say, it's about people being realistic about the system. I think the question is the system fit for purpose? If in any mandate it takes the entire mandate for a new idea to actually come to delivery. And I think that's a big challenge. I know the committee's talked about looking at delivery before, but it is very frustrating for people.
We did look at specifically at infrastructure projects and carried out a review as to what the issues might be, and CPD did produce quite a detailed action plan working to a subgroup of the procurement board, which lists addresses some of the issues, and will give some clarity, I suppose, if it goes ahead to performance. One of the issues we have is that, you can say that some of those projects that you've spoken about haven't moved ahead, but what about the $1,000 projects that have gone okay? And what proportion, if it's 50% of projects are not going well, we've got a big issue. If it's 10%, let's work on those. We put that plan in place, but it hasn't had the support now to move. But I think those are the sorts of things that, from CPD's perspective, sitting, if you like, in the middle bit, that we need to look at. We need some idea of performance in those, or else, we can always hear the horror story. We'll never hear the good news. Good news finds everybody. Good news, jobs that go well. We surprisingly do get letters from clients who tell us what a wonderful job we've done.
Jerry?
Thank you, Chair. Gentlemen, thank you, and I hope my question doesn't expose my naivety, being a new member for the first time. So, but I'm coming again from a council perspective on this matter, because we collaborated with other councils in terms of procurement to maximise the economies of scale. And I'm just wondering, has there been any collaborative working with our counterparts in the Republic? And if so, because I'm conscious of I think I took from your comments that the European regulations prevented you from really getting the best out of contracts now, in some ways. I'm just wondering now, if this anomaly now that we find ourselves in, does that now create a problem for you in a way in terms of your procurement exercises?
Well, there is provision in the existing regulations for the use of procurement in other jurisdictions. That was one of the issues that, again, was discussed as part of the revision. In terms of the Republic of Ireland, they have moved to a centralised position, but they had a very, very broken up and diverse set of contracting authorities, thousands. So their focus at the moment is to try and bring that into some sort of centralised order. Not total centralisation, but working in various sectors. We have very good relationships. We are in contact with the Republic of Ireland, and they join with us in Scotland on a regular basis just to look at how policy work is being developed. But in theory, we could use arrangements to collectively. But it's whether the parties, both North and South,
and that will continue.
Well, sort of our contact with them will continue. Yes, of course.
We do have, there are some collaborative contracts that have been let by the Cabinet Office across the water, which we can plug into, and would for some specialist goods. But you're always conscious of balancing that against wanting to make sure that obviously there's benefit for the local economy and that local firms have the opportunity to compete.
Okay.
Okay, Jim?
Yeah. Obviously, procurement is one of the most heavily regulated areas within the EU, and the whole harmonisation has been subject to repeat directives and regulations. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're acknowledging that if we weren't subject to that, we'd have a lot more flexibility, which could only be to the good, is that right?
It would give us greater control over policy issues that we might want to bring forward. That would be of particular benefit. One of the sort of issues that arises is that although we have European regulations or European directives and UK regulations, that in terms of Northern Ireland, the types of procurement that we run generally, for the most part, attract Northern Ireland firms. And maybe come back to the legal challenge, but we have Northern Ireland firms involved totally in a Northern Ireland contract, using European regulations and quoting what's happened in Greece and other places.
Well, I was going to
as a way of
two other
preventing contracts going forward. One of the things that we did suggest would be, in terms of the new directives going forward, that if there was almost like an opt-out, that if it's all Northern Ireland firms involved in a competition, European regulations would apply. That might be something that we could look at. The danger, I suppose, is that Northern Ireland, needs to trade outside Northern Ireland, and you'd be sure that if we think that'd be a good idea to have, contracts focused on a particular area of Northern Ireland, that folk in the valleys and Wales would want exactly the same. On a number of occasions, I've been in meetings with colleagues in Scotland and Wales, and they've told me they were going off to talk to ministers because Northern Ireland firms are winning contracts in construction. So I think there needs to be a balance on it, but it does give you greater flexibility, I suppose, to look forward.
There was a recent aggravation in my constituency where Transport NI placed their large order with a Spanish firm rather than with Wrightbus. If we were free from the restraints of EU regulation, would there be more flexibility in how those contracts could be set up?
In terms of the regulations themselves, the issue would be how we were tied into any trade agreements. The trade agreements would bring you back into the regulations.
Oh, possibly.
Yeah.
And whether that was a European trade agreement or other trade agreements, I mean, there is this thing called the Government Procurement Agreement, which involves the EU, but also involves the USA, Japan, China, a whole host of countries. It's not anything like so prescriptive as the directives, but it does set in place some principles like not doing something above certain thresholds that would exclude others from competing. So the what trade agreements we end up with, which of course we don't know at the moment, is going to be central to what registration regulation we have.
On top of the flexibility that might be there, one of the consequences of our current procurement rules, courtesy of the EU, is that it makes the tendering process for those who tender very expensive and very protracted. Is that fair?
It can. It depends on how you would apply it. We've done quite a bit of work now in terms of the e-tenders system that we have in place to allow contractors to place a lot of their information online just the once. So if you go to a situation where you have paper-based tendering and you want the same detail repeated, so you could do things like we use Construction Line as a way of verifying the financial standing of organisations. So there are things you can do that reduces the burden. And I think, sort of hold hands up on this. One of the issues that we've had in the past is that we've treated the £10 million contract and the £10,000 contract with the same degree of requirement. And we've been very focused now on trying to reduce the amount of information that we request repeatedly from suppliers. So that would reduce the burden. But there is an expenditure in actually tendering.
And of course, the more flexible and simplified the process becomes, the less rich pickings there are for legal challenge. Is that right?
Our view is to keep it as simple as
Yeah,
possible.
whereas EU regulation is wide open to
Well,
differing interpretation.
the issue is that the regulations themselves are not fully defined, and they're filled out by jurisprudence and case law, and that can come at you sideways from any direction.
Thank you.
Okay. Don't think anybody else has indicated. So thank you very much. We've covered quite a range of issues there, and I know, no doubt that we will be following up with yourselves on a range of those issues, particularly around the European aspect as it becomes clearer. So thank you very much.
Can I just before
Oh, you're almost aware there? Okay.
Yes, just in relation to the tender process, have you received many complaints from contractors who feel that they're not getting an opportunity to tender because they don't come up on the lottery, or the randomly, what way should I put it, presented approach to allow to tender for contracts? And some could feel that they don't get the opportunity at all, even though it probably is right next door to them.
Yeah, well, that's again a balance between allowing every contractor who wants to tender to do that. That's completely opening up the market, or recognising the feedback we've had from industry. It's around the burden of produced tenders. That, you know, to have 20 tenders in for one winner, that's a burden. What we are looking at, though, there are a number of things in the new regulations around dynamic purchasing systems, which I really don't think I have time to get into detail of, or the way that we contract construction projects that might mean it's easier to take more tenders through because the process will be slimlined. But I think if you have, you know, if you have a random selection and people understand how that happens, maybe the market can settle it. But that's something we're really going to do a bit of fresh thinking around. Obviously, this vote last week calls us to do that, so we're sort of stepping back again what we've been doing, and we want to engage with the construction industry just to see how that might happen.
It's just I've conversations with contractors. I just wanted to flag it up, and it's something that maybe could be considered in the future, who refuse now to tender for public procurement projects simply on the basis that there's so much work involved in putting forward a tender with a little hope sometimes of achieving it, because they maybe haven't had, they've delivered plenty of private sector ones, yeah, but they've never got this public sector tick on their box, and as a consequence they've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, bringing in expertise, consultants, everything else. It just seems to be throwing money at it, and they just say
we are working very closely with a number of bodies who have been running programmes for companies to say, look, public tendering is something you should think about. Here's how you do it. Here's a bit of consultancy assistance that can be given very cheaply to help you through the process. We would attend Meet the Buyer events every year where 1,500 suppliers are coming in and having an opportunity to interact with government buyers and see our systems in action. So there's certainly a very active outreach programme in terms of trying to encourage people, because the more people who come and compete for our contracts, the better the chance that we'll get the best value for money.
Okay, well, I think we'll be corresponding with you to sort of just assess when you think you might be in a better position to come and talk to us about the implications of Brexit. And I think we accept that you know, some of that, or a large part of that, will be dependent on the negotiations. And you know, I suppose it's just getting a proportionality within it as well about what we need. But we'll write to yourselves on that, just to get a sense about where you can fit into our forward work plan. But thank you very much for coming on. Okay, are there any sort of further actions arising from any of them? No? Everybody content? Okay, in that case we will move on to the next session, which is the overview of the work of the Special European Union Programmes body, briefing Permanent Finance and SUPB. I'll refer members to the following on their pack: the Clerk's briefing paper on the European Division and the Special EU Programmes bodies at page 318. to 320 of the main pack, and there's a Department of Finance briefing paper on the work of SEPB, pages 321 to 354. I'd like to welcome the following witnesses: Gina McIntyre, who is the Chief Executive of the SUPB, Frank Duffy, who is the Head of EU Division, Ryan Bartlett, Acting Head of EUD Structural Funds Management Team, and Brenda Hegarty, who's a Programme Manager in SEPB. I know it's been an eventful week, no doubt, for all of you. I'm sure there's a number of questions on that, but you're very welcome to the committee. And I'd like to invite you to make a brief opening statement.
Frank's going to go first, I think.
Chair, if you don't mind, I'll start first. As you say, the referendum on the EU membership changes the complexion of the work of certainly in my division, and also perhaps the tenor of the evidence that we're about to give at this session. I'm acutely aware of the interest in the EU-funded programmes, and specifically Peace 4 and Interreg 5. And I'd like to say we're working very closely with colleagues in UK administrations and the Irish Government to identify the impact that the referendum has had, and also the impact that the subsequent negotiations on the 2014-20 EU-funded programmes will have, particularly to ensure continuity of funding. At this stage, ministers have confirmed that as far as officials are concerned, it is business as usual for implementation of Peace 4 and Interreg 5. The Northern Ireland Executive will, of course, be involved, and as part of other devolved administrations as well, in negotiations at the high level to deal with the impact and to maximise the outcomes for our administration. I should say at the outset that I am almost certain I will not have all the answers in relation to any questions that there are in relation to this matter, and particularly at this early stage, but I'll answer what I can, and I'm happy to provide updates as the committee feels those are necessary, and provide that in evidence sessions or in writing as you feel fit. So although the referendum result will no doubt dominate my role going forward, as this is the first evidence session of the new mandate, the intention was really to, and recognising new committee membership, to outline the current role that European Union Division has, and also that of SEUPB, and to provide a brief overview of the European structural funds in Northern Ireland. With your permission, that's what I would do, so that working on the basis that you at least understand what the role is. European Union Division supports the Executive in trying to maximise the drawdown of European funds. And as the paper which I supplied to you shows, the allocation of funds currently exceeds €1,200 million, which is about £900 million for the current 7-year period. I should say at the outset that European Union Division and Department of Finance doesn't implement the programmes ourselves. That's for the spending departments or the policy lead departments for the activities that are being funded. We support and monitor their work, both establishing the programmes and the structures at the start of each funding period, and then we monitor the closure of those programmes and the final payments from the European Commission at the end of that particular programme period. Now, that includes working to secure allocations of structural funds, first of all, for Northern Ireland at the beginning of each 7-year programme period. And in doing so, we work with the UK authorities and our partners in other devolved administrations during the negotiation of regulations and the budgets for the periods in question. As part of that, we commission and collate Northern Ireland contribution to the UK high-level strategy document, which sets out the priorities for using the available funds, programme funds. And those are in line with the investment opportunities supported by the European Union regulations and also the priorities of the Executive. For the current period, that document is known as the UK Partnership Agreement, and we have a separate chapter within that document. And it was agreed in 2014, and it will be subject to mid-term review, progress review next year in 2017. On the basis of that, we make recommendations to the Minister to establish the bodies to implement the programme in question, and also the structures to monitor and support their work. And we provide guidance and interpretation of EU regulations in that respect. We monitor the implementation of programmes to ensure financial and performance targets are met, so that no monies are decommitted. We monitor also and report irregularities to the European Commission and the Anti-Fraud Office and make sure that there are anti-fraud measures in place in cooperation with UK. And finally, we monitor the closure of programmes and transmit the final reports to obtain full payment of the final balance of the allocation from the European Commission. Our main aim is to maximise drawdown. So the Department of Finance, through my division, is co-sponsor also of the Special European Programmes body. And we do that along with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform in Ireland, who is our co-sponsor. And that involves both of us in the financial governance and accountability oversight for the organisation. And that takes place at a number of different levels, both at official level, at ministerial level, and at the North-South Ministerial Council. The legislation for SUPB sets out its functions, and I'll leave that to Gina to explain to you. But the Department of Finance and our co-sponsors in DEPR, Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, we're a sponsor where we task SUPB to develop the cooperation programmes that are Peace 4 and Interreg 5 programmes for this particular programming period. And those programmes were approved both by the Executive, the Irish Government and also the European Commission. In closing, we are now at the stage of implementation for those programmes. We have an allocation of €269 million for Peace 4, that's about roughly £205 million. And for Interreg, we have €283 million, which is about roughly £216 million. Now, those are substantial sums, and of course there's been very significant interest from potential applicants for those funds. And as I'm sure the members will be aware, those funds have opened for calls, and a number of themes for Peace 4 and Interreg 5 are open for calls. And our focus now is working in conjunction with departments, SUPB and DEPR, to ensure that the successful delivery of those programmes, and above all, to maximise the drawdown of funds. Chair, if you're agreeable, I'll pass over to Gina, who will outline briefly the work of SUPB, and then, of course, we'll answer any questions that members may have.
Okay. Well, as Frank said, good afternoon, everybody. As Frank had mentioned earlier on, we're going through the closure process of the programmes that ended, all activity ended at the end of December 2015. So those programmes will be closed by 31st of March 2017, and we're working our way through those closure of the final projects and the final audits that will take place this year. So though they were very successful in relation to their targets, they succeeded their targets, and we have been able to maximise the EU drawdown in excess of 99% for Peace and actually over 100% for Interreg. So we claimed the full 100%. And as Frank also outlined, we were asked by the Member States in Northern Ireland and Ireland to prepare the cooperation programmes. And we did that over a period of about 2 years. Those programmes were developed in public consultation, and many public consultations and many public meetings, so that people could give their views on how the shape of those programmes and the content of those programmes would be. There was an oversight management committee that looked after the development of those programmes along with ourselves, a steering group, which included government departments, community and voluntary sector, local councils, trade unions and the private sector. So, as Frank alluded to, the programmes were set up in relation to the policy objectives in Northern Ireland, and in the case of Interreg, Western Scotland. So I can give you a very quick update on both of those programmes and what they are planning to deliver. The Peace programme has €269 million, and it is split across 4 areas: shared education, children and young people, shared spaces and services, and building positive relations. Over €100 million of the programme is aimed towards children and young people, and that was very much the voice of the consultations, and that's what people wanted to see out of these programmes. So the objective 1 is shared education, which is the Peace programme, I should say, was only launched in January of this year, along with the Interreg, the official launch, but the Interreg programme opened last year. So the Peace programme is running a little bit behind Interreg. And across the programme, some of the calls are open, and we have 11 applications received so far. They're quite substantial applications. It's not that they're small. And we have gone through a steering committee, and in fact there was just another steering committee this afternoon in Scotland to process 10 applications through stage 1. Because what we adopted for the new programmes was a few particular areas, one being a 2-stage assessment approach, and that was from lessons learned from the previous programming rounds. And also we wanted to take full advantage of the simplification that was offered by the Commission in the regulations and reduce bureaucracy wherever we could, and take on board all innovative and new ways of working and new technologies to deliver those programmes in a much better and faster way. Shared Education then has 30 million allocated to it, and it's planned that it will involve 350 schools as a target and output to bring in children together and teachers together to actually learn together. And it'll include preschool education, primary schools. It's not just about integrated education, it's actually bringing 2 schools together. And we hope that over the time it will involve 144,000 children in years, and 2,000 teachers will be trained in that area. That call opened on the 24th of March. We had a steering committee yesterday, and I believe there's 2 applications are proceeding now to stage 2 of that process. Children and young people itself is an area that we were putting at this stage 32 million into, and it was to look at how to develop good relations and develop personal skills and soft skills for young people who were between ages of 14 and 24 and most at risk of from disadvantaged or excluded marginalised areas, and most at risk of getting involved in antisocial behaviour. So there are a few practicalities with regard to that measure that are being sorted out at the minute, which is which departments would take that, and just in relation to how we can proceed to make sure that the young people involved don't lose any benefits or anything at this stage. Shared Spaces and Services, we have the Victims and Survivors project, which has progressed through to stage 2, and it is obviously valuable work that's previously undertaken within the peace programme. It has 6,300, a target of 6,300 people for receipt of advocacy support, and 11,000 for assessment and casework, and that call's open and progressing. Shared Spaces and Services, the capital element, which is, I'm sure a lot of you would know from your own areas, those infrastructure projects such as the likes of Skenos, Girdwood and Pettico and Tullaharmon, all those type of projects in the community groups, and we are hoping for 8 capital projects out of that, and that will be open in September. Over a third of the programme is actually to be delivered through local councils, and they are processing, and this has been open, this was the first area that opened in the programme, and they're progressing to deliver applications to us, what we call and refer to as the local action plans. And they have each been given an allocation, and that is to in the areas of children and young people, shared spaces and services, and building positive relations. So that's obviously in recognition of the grassroots work that we know the councils can do. And lastly, in the peace programme, we have building positive relations at a regional level, and there's an awful lot of interest in this particular area. And again, it's going to close in September, and it's about having regional-wide approaches to a sustained reduction in the overall level of conflict and tensions and socio-economic deprivation. So we know that there are a lot of people, judging by the number of phone calls we've had in relation to this theme. I'm sure you're all aware, but I'll just state it anyway. The Commission for this round of programmes had very much an output focused, and everything had to be target and output driven. So all our measures are set up on that basis, that we have the targets and outputs already set in the programme, and what we do when we're asking a call is to actually call for people who can deliver those outputs for us. The Interreg programme, as I said, is much further ahead. It aims to support greater territorial cohesion in a border area, and there are over 60 Interreg programmes across Europe. There's 283 million allocated to that programme in the areas of research and innovation, environment, sustainable transport and health. So within the area of research and innovation, it's split between 2 sections, one being research, relevant research and innovation capacity across the region, which was bringing together research institutions and SMEs to get involved in research that was going to create economic impacts. And that call actually was going through today, steering committee today, this afternoon in Scotland. So that has, there's applications have gone through that as stage 1. And the outputs from that are obviously, of course, all the spin-offs to the SMEs, but there's also planned to be 514 years' worth of PhD level research in that area. Further then is the research and innovation business investment, and this has a target of 1,400 enterprises, and working with enterprises and putting them in cross-border collaborations and coordinations that will increase the percentage of micro businesses in the area as well, which are involved in R&I and cross-border collaborations. Environment is an area that we took very seriously. There was environment elements in the last Interreg programme, and there's 72 million has been allocated to the environment under 2 themes: restoring biodiversity and investment in water sector. And I won't get into the detail of it, but it's about protecting habitats and priority species, and also protecting marine protected areas and species. And those calls are due to open, in stage 1 application. Will go through, it has gone through in February, It has gone through, and they're going through stage 2. And also in the area of improving water quality in transitional waters, there's 30 million there, which is to benefit 10,000 people in water treatment plants. And again, that stage that stage 1 application has gone through, and there's a steering committee on the 29th of July. Some of these have been deferred just for a little while for that. Improve freshwater quality in cross-border river basins is the last area in there, and again it's to on a cross-border basis, it's to do with management plans and improving freshwater quality in those river basins. And the final area there is on sustainable transport in the area of environment, and there's a key aim there which was to promote cross-border intermodal and sustainable mobility in the region and result in a number of sustainable transport journeys. Greenways and electric vehicles was another area we were looking at, and the public transport multimodal hub. The final one in the Interreg programme is under health and social care, and it has a large number of outputs, such as, because there's 53 million in there, it has opened and it has gone through, and there's a second stage, or the stage steering committee on the 29th of July as well, or the 27th of July. 15,000 beneficiaries were to benefit from this area, and that's our target on health and wellbeing interventions. 4,000 people to be supported, disabled people who are at risk of being socially isolated, and there'll be community support for them. And 8,000 people suffering from mental illness as well, interventions to support those people in the community. There's also care streams for 15,000 patients, and e-health interventions planned for 4,500 patients. And also vulnerable families, there were 5,000 vulnerable families to be supported in that area. That's the Interreg and Peace programmes, and the other area that SUPB is involved in is transnational programmes. We signpost organisations in Northern Ireland who wish to get involved in some of the transnational programmes, such as the Northern Periphery and Arctic programme, North West Europe programme and the Atlantic Area programme. And that was very successful in the past round, and as we're already seeing quite a significant success in this round, we have, as of June, 18 projects have been approved across those programmes, with at least one Northern Ireland partner involved in each one of those, with over 4 million of ERDF having been allocated to Northern Ireland partners. So there are further calls that will be opening later in the year and across 17 and 18, and we will signpost and help our organisations in Northern Ireland to avail of those programmes as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I know it perhaps feels a little surreal to be acting just as business as usual. I know that from what you've said, that's clearly what the Minister has asked you to do. I suspect, though, that there will be a number of things impacting very fundamentally on what you do. So I don't want to spend too much time myself just dwelling on the business as usual aspect, because I do feel that will change. But I suppose one of the questions I would have, and it actually touches on an issue we talked about before around business cases, etc., and knowing how difficult that process is, are you anticipating challenges with, you know, if you get a project in, you can only speculate, presumably, that at best you can have funds up until the UK leave under Article 50. Presumably, you have to work on a presumption that that's going to be triggered in the autumn. So you're looking at, you know, potentially in and around, what, 26-month period. These programmes clearly went beyond that period. I just wonder that, you know, you're inviting calls for programmes that go beyond that period, and even if accounting officers were comfortable that we were guaranteed to get those funds in the next 2 years, is that not going to have a real practical difficulty in the sign-off of business cases for projects that go beyond the end of that year, but at the same time there's no guaranteed funds for that? So, you know, surely we can't progress here as business as usual.
Well, I think, yeah, maybe the business as usual doesn't really reflect what we're doing, because it is business as usual in that we are going forward with a way forward, and we are continuing to keep these programmes open. But we are going to take every opportunity to change how we do business, and to ensure that these programmes are delivered to their absolute maximum for the people here in Northern Ireland. And we are going to make sure that we can change whatever we can change to ensure that those programmes are pushed forward, and that the money is spent as fast as possibly, obviously not recklessly in any way, but that we look at potential practical options. And that's one thing that we're considering now, obviously, with the Department of Finance in Northern Ireland and in Ireland, is how we can do this in such a way that, you know, possibly the projects might be shortened in lifespan, they might be asked to run parallel rather than sequential in areas. So we are looking at all our options, and there won't be a one-size-fits-all. We believe that we can still look at this, and we can still commit a lot of this money, and we can get it spent by just being careful and cautious as we assess those business plans.
There's clearly a number of business cases sitting with departments at the minute, and those have to be processed relatively soon. It was anticipated prior to last Thursday that would happen over the course of, you know, next number of months at the latest. Those business cases, are they predicated on a programme that goes beyond that sort of 26-month period? And have you had any feedback from the departments at this point? Is that they are unlikely to get accounting officer sign-off in that case?
Well, I'll answer from the fact that they are predicated on the full duration of the programme and life cycle. And in relation to accounting officer information, Frank, maybe you want to answer that?
I noticed that a similar question was asked of the Prime Minister in House Commons today about funding that would be committed under a particular programme.
So I don't know who.
Oh no, I mean I only saw it just before I came out, so I couldn't go into the detail. And indeed, I'll be participating in a teleconference discussion tomorrow with the Business and Innovation and Science Department in Whitehall, along with all the devolved administrations and other Whitehall colleagues, and be asking specifically questions about commitment to funding. At the moment, we have agreed cooperation programmes that were agreed both with the Commission, agreed with the Irish Government, and agreed with the Executive. So we have to proceed on the basis that those are our programmes that we're operating to. We have heard nothing to the contrary from the Commission that wouldn't be the case. I suspect in reality, as you move forward, once the Article 50, or when the Article 50 signature is triggered, that series of negotiations will take place. And I'm absolutely certain that the funding that is allocated to the entire range of programmes across the EU, across the UK, and also the Member States impacted by those, will have a complete focus on how much of that money is now going to be actually paid out. And I would suspect that part and parcel of the negotiations would be that expectations of honouring those particular commitments. Now, clearly, the timing of negotiations will have a major impact on that. For example, if Article 50 were to be triggered at the end of this year, which seems to be what the commentators are suggesting, then you'd be looking at a period of perhaps 2 years of negotiation. That brings us up into 2018. That's 2 years away from the end of the programme period. So I think there's a clear focus of attention then on saying how much have we spent to date and how much is still left to be spent. And I think that clearly part of the negotiation would be an expectation that any commitments would be honoured if it were not be honoured by the Commission, then one would expect that if the money were to be then released back into the UK Treasury, a case could be made to Treasury that those particular aspects could be honoured. But of course we have to talk to our Irish counterparts because they have a stake in this, as do our Scottish counterparts in relation to Interreg. So the picture is not clear. When it comes down to, I know departments are asking a series of questions, but the ministerial direction is clear that we are to proceed on the basis that we have agreed programmes, and that's what we have to work to.
Yeah, I understand the ministerial direction is clear in this, but my sense is that it seems implausible to me, could be wrong, it seems implausible to me that the European Union would pay out in year 3 and 4 when the UK has stopped paying in to the European Union. Perhaps negotiations will bring about a different position than that.
Chair,
I suppose the
could I ask
concern's
a specific
quite...
point on that? On the
yeah, I just wanted to... Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Whatever date we leave, will N+2 apply?
Well, it's N+3 at the moment, and as far as we understand, it will. In fact, one of the questions I have got down to ask tomorrow is specifically that, whether the N+3 will be honoured. And I think that's a question that has to be asked to the Commission. But you will note, Chair, that Commissioner Juncker has indicated that questions about Brexit, that they will not enter into negotiation until Article 50, and in the discussion with officials until Article 50 is triggered. So that's a moot point, but it's one that we will, I will place on the desk of the Whitehall lead department in relation to negotiations, so that it's a clear signal coming back. But we have to proceed on the basis that N+3 is part and parcel of the agreed programme that we currently have, and that situation hasn't changed.
I think the issue I'm raising is a bit more fundamental, and it's a logistical issue, which is certainly in my experience of business case sign-off and accounting officers and everything else, they will simply not sign off on a business case for anything unless they know where the funds are coming from. Now, you know, as far as we can ascertain in the relatively short period of time that we've had, Interreg can, of course, operate with non-EU, but the non-EU country or partner would need to pay for that. Now, obviously, the UK as a net beneficiary will be getting more money than what we would be getting through Interreg anyway back. Whether it's going to be spent in that way is subject again to the negotiations both within and without the United Kingdom. So, you know, I suppose the question is, are you running into a fundamental issue here in terms of our process? And have you given consideration, for example, to urgently revising those business cases to almost have a phase 1, phase 2, so your phase 1 can't be completed within the 2-year period?
Yes.
And if there is something else negotiated, it can extend beyond that, which would enable perhaps officials to have the confidence and accounting officers to have confidence to sign that off.
Chair, if I may not respond to that one, I mean, it is a very moot point and it is a real issue. I have recently written out to the accountable departments that we deal with in relation to European funding, outlining that as far as Peace and Interreg is concerned, we're still proceeding with the cooperation programmes that are agreed. But we acknowledge the fact that there will obviously be questions in relation to, particularly as we head into the latter period of that programme, whether funds are going to be available. We have asked them to work with SUPB in developing their applications to ensure as far as possible that they take account of issues like phasing, or whether or not there are aspects or modular aspects of the programme that could be delivered. It may not suit every single programme, but I think it's prudent to do so, certainly.
Or a break point or something.
Absolutely. And I have a further meeting with finance directors on Monday coming, and I expect that these questions will be aired. I don't profess to have all the answers to that, but the first major decision point coming up, the first steering committee to make decisions in relation to such applications is 27th of July. So I think that by that stage we hope to have further clarity in relation to what exactly will happen in relation to the end, particularly the end of the programme.
But we, exactly as you outlined, and that was what I was referring to earlier, we are going to look at each one of these business cases going through on a case-by-case basis and see where we can put in a break clause, because obviously no matter what we're doing, although we are moving ahead with these programmes, we wouldn't want to expose Northern Ireland or indeed the Irish government to any unnecessary risk. But I suppose if you look at the way the budgets work for Europe, there's already at this stage about 25% over the last couple of years has already been paid in for these programmes, and during the period of negotiation I have no reason to believe that the UK, as everything stays the same, will not continue to pay in during those 2 years. So there is money paid in that we want to make sure we avail of and get the EU receipts back out for. So that's why we must progress
And I suppose there may be an impact as well on that 27th of July date, because presumably departments will have to look at some revised business cases, etc. for the breakdown. Jim Wells? Jim.
It's Jim now,
Jim
younger.
Wells, yes, Jim Wells. I sort of look over that corner, two Jims there. Yeah, Jim Wells, yes, educated first.
I'm conscious of the fact I've got sort of two word authorities either side of me, and Jim and the chair on this issue, so I have to be very careful what I say. Obviously, we as MLAs have had a lot of correspondence already from various groups who already avail or hope to avail of funding. Are you setting in tow any form of special arrangements to keep those groups informed of developments who, at the minute, who are very confused about the situation? I presume you've been approached already by groups. Is there anyone has been appointed, or will there be something done to keep them abreast of all the developments?
Well, yes, I think that's why my voice is hoarse. We've had so many phone calls from groups who are worried, and they want to know, they want to ask us actually, is there anything that they can do to support these programmes, and also what the impact is on the current applications. And we are continuing on the basis of we will continue to process these applications until or unless told otherwise. We are working on that option, and we are processing through all our calls. We have a statement on our website that is there and is updated even again this morning, and we will continue to do that.
And your Twitter account.
And our Twitter account as well.
Yeah, let's assume, from the timetable that Article 50 or 30
Yes, 50.
Yes.
is invoked December 2016, and we leave the European Union in December 2018. Let's say the 1st of January is a reasonable date. Do you cease to exist on that date as a body?
No, not as far as I'm aware, we don't. But, I mean, that will be for the political parties to decide. But there are a couple of regulations that say that the spend can be drawn down for 3 years post-commitment dates. So at the end of 18, if we were able to process applications through up until 18, we would continue to spend on and to get that money drawn down from the Commission.
But would you be saying to groups, once that timetable becomes clear, will you be saying to groups that we cannot fund any project that can't be completed by the 1st of January 2019?
Well, that again will depend on the negotiations and how it goes through. We can't say that at this point in time. What we will be saying is a staged approach to make sure that if there is more money available over and above what we know will be available up to the end of 18, we will be able to give that to groups. So we're looking at every individual case in regards to staging, phasing, or whether they can run their activity before the end of 18.
There are no plans to make any such announcement, and I think the ministerial direction is quite clear that we are there to honour the full extent of the programmes, and indeed the Irish Government have indicated its commitment to the full extent of the programmes. Now, if the scenario that you talked about were to happen, clearly there are 2 years still to run on the programme, and I think that you would expect, if the negotiations had taken place at that stage, that the issue of what's going to happen in relation to those two years would be addressed. So we'd be able to give a clearer message about where the funding were coming from. But the clear expectation at the moment is that we will move to fulfil those programmes.
Of course, many of these programmes have co-funders in addition to yourselves. For instance, district councils, government departments. Now, what clarity do they have, as well as the actual bodies who are applying for the money? What contact are you going to have with them?
Well, that will all be part of, as we go through each business case and the assessment of it in the steering committee, and who needs to be informed and how those projects either need to be reshaped or phased, and that will all become part of the individual negotiations on those.
Yeah, but in relation to the Peace and Interreg, for example, programmes, 85% of the funding comes from the European Union, and 15% of the funding is match funding. That match funding is held in a central pot in Department of Finance, and is then released to departments according to as the programmes are approved. So there is a pot of match funding in anticipation that programmes expenditure would be.
But are you not likely?
Some of them we do have.
Of course, yes.
We do have other funders.
But you're not likely to reach a situation where the business case stacks up in normal circumstances you would fund it, but you won't be able to release an approval because you won't know for maybe many months as to what's actually going to happen.
Well, we think that based on the information we have at the minute, we're working on the premise that we will release the money up that would run up until the end of 18. and that we would be able to do that on a phased approach or a staged approach with the projects.
So you can give that commitment to groups now that you'll run to December 18?
That's we're working under those instructions at the minute, that we're progressing these programmes, and that's the Northern Ireland Executive position, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Is that happy enough? Yeah.
Okay. I'm not sure. I do think it's something that we will need to get some clarity on, particularly around departmental contributions to that as well. Because again, that's going to have an impact, because all of the mainstream government departments will have to make a contribution, as we know, to Peace Fund, and that'll have to be signed off as well. So it's not just Interreg where it comes into accounting officer territory. In terms of whether the organisation ceases to exist, again, we can get clarity about that, but my understanding is you're set up under treaty from the Irish government and the United Kingdom government, so you may have no money.
It'll still be there.
Chairman, as I say to you, I'm meeting finance directors on Monday, and I am absolutely certain that I will be hit with very detailed questions which I will not have the answer for, and I think that clarity will be sought.
Correspond with you just to get clarity around, because I know a lot of community organisations will be sort of have a lot of questions around what happens with the application process, etc., and we'll just have to work through that. Jim Alistair.
Yeah, just a different theme. Why has SEUPB never attained a balanced workforce in Northern Ireland?
Well, I couldn't possibly reply on the basis of all the people who didn't apply to the organisation, but I know that everybody that's been hired in the organisation has been hired on a fair basis, and we report to the Equality Commission as well, you know. And so, as far as I'm concerned, we have done all that we can, and we have affirmative action plans in that regard. We have taken, we have actioned those over the years.
How many years have you existed?
10 years, over 10 years.
And in every one of those 10 years, there's been an underrepresentation of people from a Protestant background working for SEUPB.
Everyone, yeah.
The latest, well, you can maybe give us up-to-date figures, but the figures I had for last year was 19 employees from a Protestant background, 31 from a Catholic background, and 3 other. And it's been like that from the beginning.
Well, as you know, it's a small workforce, so 1 or 2 people leaving and changes the figures quite dramatically, can swing it. But certainly we have, our current figures would be 59% are from a Roman Catholic background, 35% are classified as Protestant background, and there's 6% who are non-determined.
That's the same.
And
that's those percentages.
Yes, and in the senior management, it would be an absolute 50% split.
And are you content with the inability to have a balanced workforce?
Well, I'm sure you would be aware that we do all that we can do to encourage people to join us, and we have a lot of people who are working with us and are very committed to this organisation, and they are all hired on a fair basis.
Do you think there's some inherent reason why you haven't been able to attract adequate Protestant applicants?
Well, maybe it could come down to support from the likes of yourselves for bodies such as ours that might encourage some more applications from the Protestant community. But certainly, every time we look at our recruitment processes, when we do that, obviously we get applications, and there has never been any challenge with regard to recruitment in our organisation.
But you're an organisation that makes much of your outreach across communities. Fair enough. But for yourselves, you have failed lamentably in that regard.
As I said, we adopt fair employment practices, and that's what we do.
Well, whatever practices you adopt, they aren't working. Do you accept that?
I don't accept that. I would accept that we have
and
employed,
you think you're content enough?
Fair employment practices.
Are you content with the balance?
Well, I think, of course, everybody would love to see a 50-50 balance, but unfortunately we don't have that. And that.
So what are you doing
about it? Well, as I said, over the years we have taken many affirmative action plans and action steps and welcoming statements, and we're content that all our practices are absolutely correct.
Are you content with the current situation?
No, I didn't say I'm content with it. I'm saying
What are
that
you
I'm
doing
content
about
with how we have implemented our fair employment processes. But as of the minute, we don't have any challenges. We are totally in line with fair employment, and the Quality Commission are content with our practices.
And the product of that is significant underrepresentations of Protestants in your workforce.
That is the case as of today.
Thank you.
Okay, Claire?
Right, thank you very much for that, and I appreciate there's far more questions than there are answers. I can't help be reminded, I think it was The Price is Right, of that here's what you could have had part on a game show. Just could you outline what conversations you had with the executive prior to last Thursday to plan for just the scenario that we're in now?
Is that both of us?
Yeah, whoever.
Well, first of all, in relation to ourselves, the negotiations in relation to the EU membership is the non-devolved matter. It's at the national level, and the clear stance
somebody's got that.
And the clear stance that came from Whitehall was that the UK government's position was remain, and that therefore there were to be no contingency plans or no contingency planning or discussions with the Commission about the prospect of departure.
Okay, there wasn't a similar position from the Northern Ireland Executive in this devolved region, and I think disproportionately we rely considerably more on that funding. We never had any, and I'm not putting this on you in any way, shape or form, but we never had any assurances that that would be replaced, and due to the fiscal tightening that's coming our way, it clearly isn't going to be replaced, even if some of the categories and the specific targeting that you do in terms of social isolation and dislocation was in any way on the current government's radar. But can I just confirm that here the Northern Ireland Executive made no attempt to have any discussions about contingency and how this sort of business plan, some of these issues, nobody made any attempt from the NI Executive to have a conversation with you about putting any contingencies in place, either for the funding that's already committed or how it was spent, or any potential to try and secure future funding? There was no attempt by the NI Executive to do that. Okay, that's fine.
We did have some conversations like that with the Irish government.
The Irish government
officials.
So the Irish government officials tasked you to do that, and the Northern Ireland Executive did not.
Well, we certainly had discussions with them about the implications. Yeah.
John O'Dowd?
I want to bring you back to the origins of your body. You are a product of the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes.
Yes?
Against them.
Okay, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Legacy.
And therefore, I'm just looking at the legislation under which you were formed, the British-Irish Agreement Act 1999. So the EU referendum wasn't about, well, God knows what it was about. Whatever the outcome of the EU referendum, there is nothing within that referendum which will see the annulment of the British-Irish Agreement Act 1999. Would that be correct in thinking that?
Yeah, but there's no money.
Right. Well, let's get to that point. Okay. And you seem to delight at the fact that they've no money.
No, I'm just making the point, you can't have a body with no money to spend.
Well, you should have thought of that before you voted us out of the European Union. But moving on to that point, because I think you're actually in a very good position.
So did I.
Because all this money that apparently is going to come back to these shores from Europe, our cup is going to overrun with money apparently. If your body has been established under the Good Friday Agreement, which is an agreement between the British and Irish governments, an internationally recognised agreement and an agreement that is lodged with the United Nations, then I would suspect that you have a very good call on that money. Or certainly the executive, working in conjunction with the Irish government, has a very good call on the British government to honour its commitments under the Good Friday Agreement.
Well, yes, I would like to share your view. But I mean, I do think that there are options going forward with regard to programming. And as the Chair has already alluded to, there are programmes around Europe, both in Norway and Switzerland, Interreg programmes that operate on the basis of one member is in and one member is not. And those programmes, that's always an option for Northern Ireland to get involved in. And I don't think it's any secret that the Northern Ireland Executive have made it very clear that they're talking to the Irish Government about maintaining cooperation north and south. So yes, I would like to think that there are possibilities and ways that they could bring that money back into the region, because that's what this is all about, looking after the people of this region.
I think it might also add is that, you know, we know that the European Commission has invested a lot of time and money and effort in relation to the peace programme, for example, and the very fact that we have a special European Union programmes body, I think, is indicative of that, of how they view it. So I think that I would hope and expect that the Commission will recognise that there is a special case, indeed, in Northern Ireland, should the Article 50 be triggered and the negotiations conclude before the end of this programme period, that this programme, the peace programme in particular, be continued. And as Gina has said, there's nothing to prevent the European Commission from actually funding such a programme outside its own boundaries, if it's in the interests of the European programmes, or European Commission so to do.
Okay, because I was only jotting down the figures there, but I think in total it's over, so we're in the region of £500 million we're looking to spend over the next number of years. And I obviously know, in relation to the shared education programme, the benefits of what could flow from that. So I think there is an onus on us all to certainly take note of today's presentation and take note that whatever negotiations are coming forward, that there's obligations here on both sovereign governments, and I think an obligation on the executive to do everything within our power to ensure that there is funding fed through this body, as it's an integral part of an agreement which all of us would be sitting here. Any of us would be sitting here if it wasn't in place. So just remember that. You may not like it, but if the Good Friday Agreement wasn't in place, this committee meeting wouldn't be taking place.
Great.
But the difficulty in that, Jim, is you haven't convinced anybody else with that argument. So I don't expect us to comment on that, but I think in terms of moving forward, certainly you have a very good call on whatever money flows from the British government, which was used to send to Europe, and we could debate that one all day, which is going to be there, but certainly in terms of the British and Irish governments and the executive, I think he's have a very strong case to make.
Thank you. And obviously we don't know what's going to happen, and it would be speculation to do so, but our priority, and just to be absolutely clear, is to draw down as much of this money, that 550 million that's on the table that we had signed up to. That is our priority, and we are going to be doing absolutely everything to draw down as much as we can of that in the coming years.
And my division's key objective is maximise the drawdown of European funds available to us. That is the key priority.
Okay, thank you.
Just check, is your drawdown profiled over the course of the next 4 years?
Yes.
So you know
Yes.
how much you can draw down per annum, so you have a good sense about how much you can.
Yes, and we also know how much, the UK government would be paying in as well.
For example, up to 2018, it would be roughly about 60% of the programme would be profiled.
Okay, I admire the member of the committee's optimism there. I'm not sure it's shared by everybody around the committee, but
a lot of optimism going about
Jerry Mullen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, panel. And help yourself, Gina, to start. But I think at this point we can assume that we're going on the assumption that it's going to be 2.5 years before the umbilical cord will be cut. And I know from the recent experience I've had in terms of Irish passport, there's been an unprecedented influx of people looking for passport. And I don't expect it to have a crystal ball, but do you anticipate a similar spike in applications in terms of your programmes, or do you think people will be just put off by the fact that the uncertainty will think, well, what's the point?
Well, I think there was always that risk before the referendum, and I do think there will be two waves of thought there. People will be saying, this is our last chance to avail of this money, and look at the outputs that we're going to be delivered, and we're going to go out there and we're going to get that, and that's our job to do, and encourage people to do that, with obviously a prudent approach up until what we think is available. But some people may be put off, and there's some of the larger projects that may decide better maybe retain this within government rather than do this. But this is through the programmes. But this is all the options that we're going to be working through really carefully over the next month or two, and to find the way forward to get this money into the region.
I think it's fair to say that the programme was always going to be tight, and therefore demand was expected to be high, because the European Commission, and indeed we agreed with our Irish Government counterparts when going to the Commission, that we should try as far as possible to look for strategic, impactful programmes rather than a whole series of small programmes. Now, that naturally affects the pot that's available. Clearly, in Northern Ireland, there is a demand also for small programmes, so that demand still exists, but the amount of money available is by its nature smaller, and therefore you would expect a much higher demand. And I don't think that situation is going to go away. Even though there are uncertainties about this one, I think people will still put their hat in the ring, so to speak.
Yes.
Well, I think that's a message that has to be put out there,
Yes.
and that's where we as well come into play.
Absolutely.
Because people need to know that there is certainty around their programmes. If they engage in it, they need to know that that'll be successful and completed.
Yes, and that's very much now for the Peace Programme, because the Interreg Programme, we've all our calls open.
Yeah.
So we have received applications on all those areas, but certainly for the Peace Programme, and that will be where a lot of the community groups will be going in through their local councils to access this money, so it's to encourage them to do just that.
And again, I think perhaps it is up to us to help spread certainty when there is certainty, and I think that isn't the case necessarily at the moment. But as I said, we will be corresponding with you sort of over the course of the next month to find out if you've got clarity, and we'll share it with committee members. And lastly, Philip.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify on some of the points you made. The European Commission have clearly said that they expect Article 5 to be put in either on the 4th of September or on the 16th of September, depending on who's elected to the Conservative Party leadership. That being the case, then essentially the 2 years will run out September 18. You said your funding profile, obviously it's 0.55 billion from the paper here, 14 to 20. So obviously some of it's already been spent, and some of it will be spent obviously in the next 2 years. You said, Frank, about the spending profile there, about 60%.
Roughly 60%, yes.
So that being the case, come September 18, that leaves roughly 18 or so months left. How much do you think will still be in the kitty at that point?
But I think this is a moot point, because as part of the negotiation process, you're clearly going to be pointing out, I would expect, to the Commission officials and indeed others, and I'm sure the Irish Government and ourselves will be weighing in on this one, that commitments will be entered into. There's practical and pragmatic considerations in any investment decision. And therefore, I think there's a very strong argument to be made that you need to honour the full amount within the programme. Now, the corollary of that could be, well, there's another way to cut that, which is, if you're not going to be providing that money to the European Commission, does that money become available from Treasury to honour the commitments, and indeed from the Irish Government? And I think that's the contingency plan, if you like. If the Commission won't accept that, then there is a fallback position in relation to how you could fund the programmes and still honour the commitments that are within the programme itself.
Well, I think maybe.
But that has to be clarified. I do take a point.
Yeah. But I think it's just trying to scope the size of that ask, because if the EU drop the barriers at that point and say no more funding, then the alternative is to go to the Treasury and say, okay, we're saving 50 million a day apparently, so can we have some of that, please? So it's just, what will that be? What will that ask be?
The potential is the 40% of the programme that has not yet been allocated, and that would be, if my maths was great, I could tell you it's probably 200 million.
No, well, it's the 60% is actually what the government, the UK government and the Irish government have paid into the MMF, the European budget, by the end of 18. That's what they've paid in. So we will commit the money in such a way that we can ensure we get that back as a minimum. During the period of negotiations, it's going to take place with the departments and BIS in the UK. Obviously, and I'm sure the Northern Ireland Executive will be championing hard to make sure that that remaining 40% from Northern Ireland is replaced by UK Treasury money. If indeed there's still always a potential that could be, again, but it's speculation, that the programmes could be run out in their entirety, because remember, we're just 1 and 2 small programmes here in the region compared to the whole of the UK government programmes. And the UK EU programmes, a lot of them are already committed well in excess of 60% of those programmes alone. And I believe they're working under the instruction of carry on until the end of 18. So we would be trying, and that's why we were going to try and encourage everybody to speed up their actions and their activities. And we know that there will be a potential of a rewrite of the programmes, but we will do that to make sure this money is maximised.
There'll be no issue around encouraging people to draw down funding quicker?
No, because obviously that's why we're saying we'll do that in a case by case of how, you know, there may be some of the activities could have been planned to run sequential. We'll get them to run in parallel now, and we'll just talk to every project that we're going to award funding to see what we can do, or indeed if there would be a break point at the end of 18 to say we can fund you now up until the end of 18 and give a commitment there, and at that stage we should have a lot more clarity about what happens and where the money comes from in the last 2 years.
I think I should add also that you know, the considerations of value for money and good management of public money still have to apply, and accounting officers will insist on that. Yeah. It's not a scramble to spend the money as quickly as we can. It has to be done prudently, and indeed I expect you would take very close attention to that.
And presumably the breakpoint could also include the wind down and conclusion of the programme. So you may not be in a position to have United Kingdom government confirmation.
Exactly, and that's why we'll need to reshape each of these projects to make sure that they are available to do whatever is required at the end of 18.
But I think what we do know is that the UK is a net contributor to the European Union. There will be more funds coming back, so I think it's a case of how, you know, how that is used. Is it used for these types of programmes? Do we get it in Barn Consequentials? Is that part of the negotiation in terms of Interreg generally across the UK? Sorry, I know we said last, but Paul is
just on that point, and it's in relation to that, because if Europe have dictated how we spend this money up to now. Dictated, and I'm using that term because, and I'm not so sure, because you hear about all of these cross-border projects and how they're all running out. And I've asked a question whenever Pat McColgan was run to the committee before, and it was in relation to how are we sure that we were getting a fair share of the crack of the whip whenever it came to the Interreg money, which was cross-border spend, and how that was working out. But if, and just wanting to tease this out, if the British government and UK Parliament are going to be the people footing the bill, they will not be dictated to as to how we should spend that money. I would have been more of a mind of receiving it through Barn Consequential and dealing with it on that basis. But that's beside the point. But that's how I see it working. How do you think the dictation in relation to what potentially, and I'm coming back to what John had said previously about this so-called link in of a legal issue, which might or might not contribute. Telling somebody how they can spend the money that they give them is a big problem. And I have an issue with that. What way do you feel that could impact upon future delivery?
Well, these programmes in the consultation, as I mentioned at the start, they everybody agreed that this was a good way to spend this money for the region here, and so it has already been outlined in that. The money will be committed by this point in time over the next couple of years. When you reach that stage you're talking about, that money will have been committed, and it's just a matter of spending it on those activities to deliver those outputs. But certainly after that, whatever happens in regard to the programmes and however they are, and if whatever programmes are put in place by the UK Treasury, that will be a matter for them and the Northern Ireland Executive, I'm sure, to decide how that money's spent.
Yeah, I think I'll just add to that. I think the term dictate is, first of all, the programmes were agreed on the basis of issues that were identified at the UK-wide level and European level in terms of what are the structural issues that need to be addressed. Then through a period of consultation that was undertaken for over 2 years in both Scotland and in Northern Ireland and in those eligible areas in Ireland, what we found is that these were the recommendations that came forward. Those were then agreed with the 2 member states and then taken to the Commission and finally agreed and then endorsed by the Executive. So I think that that's the process that has gone through, rather than someone saying this is what you must do.
I totally understand that, but I go back to one, and we mentioned in a previous thing here today, where the AEA project, I'll just use that as an example, a certain amount of EU funding which was to come from the Republic of Ireland to help that project, we're now being told, well, that wasn't for happening, it's all going to go into the A5 and A6 now. They because they had certain problems within their own economy at that time, that was put on the long finger, and the monies had to be divvied up from our Northern Ireland Executive to actually make up the shortfall in that financial year when it was put forward. And that's the sort of point I'm making. There was 20 million which was promised, which never came across at that time to deal with that project. And that's, you know, you understand? I'm very sceptical about the whole thing.
I know we've kept you for some considerable time, but John says he's got a wee question.
It's a point where, and in relation to that actual funding, that wasn't an IDREG funding, that was an agreement between the executive and the Dublin government, which the Dublin government reneged on.
Well, that's fine. Happy enough.
Yeah, I'm happy to get stuck in the Dublin government. But in relation to, I also want to make, I think the point is, Piece 4, the programmes that were outlined there under Piece 4 were agreed by our executive, brought to the North-South Ministerial Council and agreed at the North-South Ministerial Council. There was no bureaucrat in Europe dictated how that money should be spent. Local politicians here brought to the North-South Ministerial Council and agreed. Can I just for my own notes, in terms of the universal figures you give there for Piece 4 and IDREG, what were you again? In terms of much plan spend? 269
and 283.
That's euros.
Million euros, yeah.
And then, but that could be anything now.
It's roughly 200 odd.
205.
229 for Peace.
In ERDF.
ERDF, European receipts.
Yeah.
And the European receipts are in relation.
I'm not giving a figure. If my memory was, it's 200. The allocations are 269 million euro, which is roughly 205 million pounds.
That's for Piece 4.
Piece 4.
Yeah.
283 million euro, which is approximately 216 million pounds for IDREG 5.
Okay, thank you.
And so just. Paul, in response to your point, that was the beauty, actually, Frank reminded me, the beauty of these programmes was that the money was committed from the outset, like it was for these 2 programmes now, and whenever a project did slip, for whatever reasons and viable reasons, we were able to reallocate that money and use it within the programme, so we never lost it, but from either the Irish Government or the Northern Ireland Executive.
Okay, well, it has been a lengthy session, but I think it's been very useful. I think so much so. I think we should send a transcript of it to the other committees too, let them see the insight into discussions. So thank you very much. I think it's an old Chinese curse, I think, may you live in interesting times. I see this more as an opportunity and a good thing, but you're certainly living in interesting times for SAUPB, so no doubt we will be in touch, and we certainly do want to be kept informed and be in contact with you about the implications, particularly around the programmes and what will happen in terms of 2-year, 4-year issues. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. We could do with a bit of tedium.
Okay.
My last strepsil. Next. My last strepsil.
I'm conscious that we have run on considerably over time, and I think we're not at the point of quorum, but we're probably quite close to losing quorum. So
we agreed based on whatever this committee starts that we will have these short meetings, but
just to move on then, just very quickly to potential overarching areas of interest which relate to public finance in general and to the budget. It's a written briefing that's contained within your pack. I'm not sure how you want to deal with it. Do you want to have a discussion of this today? Do you want to take a look at that separately? And just making the sort of and consider what I do want us to have a good conversation about this and a good discussion about this. I think it is important. Clearly there's a number of emerging issues which I think we can be very useful on, but perhaps the best way to deal with that would be to everybody take a look at that and perhaps to feed in your views. There's a range of options there about how we can move some of the issues on, particularly around research.
We're meeting on the 11th of July. Is there a possibility we could have some discussion at that meeting on this matter?
Well, potentially. It may be that members have a range of questions for the NCA, but certainly we can schedule. How long do we think the meeting's going to be on the 11th with the NCA?
I would imagine it'd probably be an hour, possibly less. I mean, it's generally.
Well, we can, if members want, schedule in a short meeting afterwards, maybe of 30 minutes to talk about this issue.
Yeah.
Would members be content to make that a an informal meeting and ratify it later on, because it's for a short meeting like that in the middle of recess, it creates an awful lot of.
I think if it's more of sort of it's a discussion about sort of planning, really, it's really on our forward work programme, and certainly item number 10, I think is connected to that as well, which is around our forward work programme. So we've had some discussion. I think everybody's getting a picture of where their own interests lie with this. We've heard a range of witnesses there. So yeah, we have an informal, maybe 30 minutes after that, just to have a discussion about what we want to do in September, October, what witnesses we want to call, etc. So if you're content with that approach, we'll move on. There's correspondence in your pack. So just to ask members to agree, suggested actions, the Deliver and Social Change consultation events we've been invited to. It's just for the committee to note. There is a programme for government timetable contained in 370-371 from the committee for the Executive Office. The suggested action is to receive the action plan from the Department of Finance by the end of August and receive briefings from the Department and key stakeholders in relation to both the programme for government and budget in order to inform our return to the committee for the Executive Office in September. So to try to sort of merge those and have briefings across both. I know it is on the discussion, and we'll discuss it next on the 11th, around how we bring the programme for government outcomes focus together with the budget outcomes focused issue, so it may well come into play there. There's a correspondence from the Department of Finance, which is notification of a consultation on proposed changes to the proposed changes to, I think it's on the proposed changes to the Building Regulations Northern Ireland 2012 as amended. And note that the Department will send out a SL1 to the committee after the consultation has finished. That's on pages 372 to 375. There's a letter from HMRC we discussed last week, I think it was, or the week before, in relation to inviting them to come along, give us some briefing around corporation tax. So that's there to note. Department of Finance, there's a follow-up from the Public Expenditure Review 2016 outline 17, 2016-17 DEL receipts. That's on pages 377 to 378. And there is a letter from Catalyst NI, which I think is a new name for the Science Park, if I'm right. That's right. Which is the new phase of development, which is contained in page 379 to 380. So those are just to note. Anything arising from that? There's a number of reports that are available from room 435 as well, if members are interested. There's a Department of Finance memorandum on the 34th report from the Public Accounts Committee, mandate 2011 to 2016, the Northern Ireland Events Company.
That actually is a fascinating
I was going to say it, the name probably doesn't, doesn't do it justice.
It is a real barrel of laughs.
Yeah. There's a report from the Assembly Ombudsman for Northern Ireland, the annual report and accounts for the year ended March 2016. The forward work programme is the next agenda item, and if members are content, we'll deal with that in the short meeting on the 11th. Moving swiftly on then to any other business, committee input on FOI matters during summer recess. Just to inform members that it is normal practice for committees to delegate that authority to the chairperson and deputy chairperson during periods of recess to submit views and releasing or withholding information. In the previous mandate, in the final meeting of each session, the committees agreed to delegate this authority. The committee would be advised of any such request and the views expressed by the chairperson or deputy chairperson and the response issued by the FOI unit at the first available meeting following the recess period. The only thing I would add to that is I do think this requires a bit of judgment by the clerk in that, and I'm sure he will exercise good judgment on this. I think if anything is coming in that is controversial, or for example pertaining to the likes of some of our previous discussions on ongoing matters, I think, you know, if the clerk feels that there is any aspect of it that is controversial, I think it would be good to notify members of that prior to making a decision around under the delegated authority, you know, so that we have an opportunity to consider that. But I assume that most of these requests will be very standard and non-controversial. But perhaps if there is that judgment on what, I think you know what those kinds of issues may well be, just to get a view from members, to make sure members are aware as well, that we're not caught on the hop. So with that condition, are members content with that approach?
Yes.
Are there any other business that anybody wants us to discuss?
Can I just ask, at last week's presentation, officials were going to give us a breakdown of the loan, how much in debt the executive is.
In terms of councils?
Has that information come in yet?
No, it hasn't come in yet.
And if we can perhaps circulate that even over the recess period, so members, any other matters?
What are we doing with these? Are we bringing them up?
No, we're leaving those and they're being picked up again because they've been doing the other papers. So the date, time and place of the next meeting. Remind members that the planning meeting is scheduled for Wednesday the 7th of September 2016. Any suggestions of venues, please feed those into the clerk. Preferably venues that there's no cost attached to, but may bring us out of this building and into, you know, I know that it can be difficult unless members are paying it themselves, no. So I know it can be difficult, members to get called away from, you know, if they're in the building, etc. So have a think, and as I said, you know, with preferably no additional cost whatsoever. And the next meeting then, of the formal meeting, will be on Wednesday the 14th of September 2016 in this room at 2 p.m. So does the committee agree we now adjourn?
Right.
Okay.
Room 29.